Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you. And we're going to talk about data masking, data anonymization, and how organizations are doing it at scale. Some of it is based on the experience we have here at Satori with our customers, and some of it is based on my experience and others' experience and discussions we're having with data and security leaders. So a little bit about myself. My name is Ben Herzberg, and I'm a chief scientist for Satori. I'm also a co-author of the Snowflake Security book published by APRES last year. I'm a data SecOps guy, so my experience comes from the security space. I was the head of research for Imperva. I was the CTO at Signet, and other roles around security, around engineering, and owning and consuming a lot of data along the way. So that's more or less about me. And the second angle of data SecOps being that I believe that security needs to be part of the data operations. So that's the second reason why I'm a data SecOps guy. And you have my details in there. So if you want to reach out with any questions, comments, or just to connect, feel free. That's my email, my LinkedIn, and my Twitter. And that's me, by the way, but you can see me on the camera as well. And before I forget, I decorated the slides with some images, some photos from Pixabay, which is a great platform for getting images from. So with that, let's begin our voyage, or let's begin our story here. And the reality is that in companies around the world, and not only in like the typical companies you may think of that are quote unquote data-driven companies, everybody wants value from data. It's not just a BI team that is, of specialists with data, or data scientists, or something like that. In companies across all industries, what we see is that everybody wants a piece of the data. It's marketing, it's sales, it's customer success, it's RevOps, it's DevOps, it's everybody. Everybody wants value from data. When customer success sees that sales gets better results when they're using data and analytics, they want to use it as well to prevent attrition or increase retention or grow their customers, and so on. Everybody wants value from data. But data is also getting harder to control because there are many data stakeholders touching the data, manipulating the data, copying the data, and so on, because data is in many cases more semi-structured than it used to be. There's more use of semi-structured data, which in some of the cases, some of the data appears only in part of the records, and it's harder to control it because of that. It's hard to control it because it moves a lot, and that creates an environment where everybody wants access to data, but access is hard to control, and that results in more risks around data. So this can be security risks. There's always security risks when it comes to data, also in the quote-unquote old days, but when there's more people accessing data, there is more risk for sensitive data exposure and other security risks. Compliance risks. It's harder to create a map of who has access to what types of data, to sensitive data, of where my sensitive data is. So there's more risks around that. And privacy, with all the privacy regulations, acts, laws around the world, keeping consumer data or personal data has more privacy costs as well. So data is not just your biggest asset, it's also a very big liability as well. And last but not least, when a lot of people are touching a lot of data that keeps changing, there's also operational risks involved as well, starting from overcharging because someone scanned large parts of your data warehouse that is costing you per data scanned, to downtime and other operational risks. So that's a bit of background about that I'm sure that most of you are familiar with. Now let's talk about anonymization or masking and why companies are even doing that. In some of the cases it's very obvious, but let's still walk hand in hand through it. So the first reason is security. As I was saying, security is about lowering risks while maintaining the values that teams and users are getting from the data. So if you are exposing employees to data that helps them get more value to your organization, that's great, but you're also increasing the risk of data exposure. The more people who have access to data, the bigger the risk. But if you're able to anonymize the data or desensitize it, reduce the risk of, even if this data set goes public, it does not contain the crown jewels or the sensitive data, then you've decreased your risk. So that's a good reason to anonymize or mask data. Another reason is compliance. Sometimes it's a very specific requirement to keep, for example, a credit card, to keep it masked in a certain, what can you show and what can't you show, and sometimes it's something that is more needs to be interpreted and may come up in audits, but part of compliance is also about anonymizing or masking data before it reaches customers, before it reaches data users, also before it reaches customers. And another part is contractual obligations. In many cases, either implicitly or explicitly, you have obligations to anonymize data or keep it masked. So you need to go for a project of data masking. And last but not least, I would think that this aggregates them all because we love aggregations. So I would say that you anonymize data or you desensitize it or you mask it to actually get value from data, because otherwise you will be at a risk and at some point you're going to hit a brick wall. But to actually fuel your data train, whatever metaphor you choose, to actually get value from data, you need to make sure that you're doing it in a responsible way without exposing sensitive details. This can be personal details, IP, like custom sensitive data that your company has. It can be PHI, healthcare information, and so on. Those are the business reasons. I think there's also a moral obligation. If you own data that is sensitive, that belongs to people, you need to treat it as you would want your data to be treated. So you want data to be used for innovation, but you want it to be anonymized so that only if people really need the personal details, for example, if they're shipping you a gift, they need your address, only then they will get your data. Let's talk about some of the terms and examples of anonymization and masking techniques and terms. So first of all, there's redaction. There's like taking a black marker and reducting stuff, like like the classic censorship. So basically, it's removing pieces of sensitive data from your data set. So in this example, if the name says Ben, the name will say redacted, or it will be null, or it will be an empty string. So that's the first term in use or technique, and that's for a different discussion, but a lot of these terms are either interchangeable or overlap, but that's for, but still let's get to know some of them. So another technique is hashing. Hashing of data takes a piece of data. This can be, for example, a name, and it hashes it. It applies a one-way encryption algorithm over it, such as SHA-256 or other hashing algorithms, and it encrypts the text. It's a one-way encryption, so you can't go back from that. You can't take the hash value and extract Ben from the hash value, but you've transferred all your names to something that's anonymized. The pro of doing it, or the advantage of applying hashing, is for cases where you want to maintain the uniqueness of the values, or for correlations. So for example, if you have all the transactions done by user and you're doing hashing on the user ID or the username, you don't know which user it was, but you know all the different transactions that belonged to different users. So that is hashing. Averaging is useful for very certain use cases, but still wanted to get it in. It's basically to replace values with the average of that value across all your records. So you don't give away the age, but you do put an average that is at least meaningful in some way. And again, it's useful in very specific cases. Another one is shuffling, where you're taking names and values and you shuffle between the names and the values. Again, depending on the use case, sometimes it may make sense to do that as well. Something that is very common is masking, that's done in a partial way. So a good example is credit card. You can't store the entire credit card, but you're storing the last 4 digits, for example. So this is the transformation that occurs. Or you have emails, you remove the username, but you keep the domain name. So you know, for example, in cases where you need to know how our customers that were using Gmail participated, were engaged, as opposed to customers who were of other domains. So partial masking is important as well. Another thing that can come as another term that is used is format preserving encryption, format preserving masking, hashing. Basically, it's taking one of those techniques, but leaving the text or the element, leaving the format intact, so it will be more friendly, sometimes a little bit less error prone. But so you, for example, you take the username, you hash it, but then you keep it with the domain name as an example. So that's another example of a technique or a term that is used for masking. And I think it's the last term that I wanted to mention. It's pseudonymization. I placed it mainly to break my teeth. But it's replacing your sensitive data, mostly used for PII, with artificial identifiers or pseudonyms, aliases, in other words, or sometimes tokens. So if my name is Ben, my name will be ABCD. But somewhere along the way, there can be a lookup table where we know how to trace back ABCD to Ben. So in cases where I'm doing some sort of research and then I need to get back to one of the users and tell them that they, I don't know, I don't want to give a bad example, but they have a certain disease. We can go back and or someone else with the privileges can go back and tell them, the hopefully good news. So that's pseudonymization. And when these things are applied, and this can be a full session or workshop of its own. Usually, masking policies are part of the security policies that are applied on data access. And the main building blocks, like looking really from a high level at masking or anonymization policies, is basically looking at the identity or who is accessing the data. It can be the user, in many cases with the RBAC or role-based access control. It can be the role of the user. Like my role is a data scientist, so I can access the data where it's anonymized in a certain way. So it's looking at the identity. When or at what context or situation I'm trying to access the data. This is not always in place, but as example, am I in the office right now? Maybe if I'm in the office, I can access the data clear text, and when I'm connected from the outside of the office, I'm not. Or am I on shift or am I not on shift, for example? But these are attributes about me. It can also be geographical attributes about me, like I'm in Germany right now, so I can look at the clear text values of German citizens, for example. It can be you need for the policies the data itself. So it should be the type of data, like is it PII, or even more granular, is it a phone number, is it a birth date? What is the type of data, as well as what is the data set? Like if it's a person name, is it a customer person name or is it an employee person name? And according to all of these predicates or all of this contextual information, you apply the masking per the policy. So, for example, if I am from HR and I'm in the office and I'm accessing HR data, I can see everything. But if I'm from finance and I'm accessing HR data, I can only see everything masked, for example, except for the money I need to transfer and the bank account I need to transfer to. So this is just a high-level discussion about data masking policies. By the way, in our website, satoricyber.com, if you go up to the navigation bar under resources, there's a complete guide to data masking, and it has a chapter of data masking policies as part of it. So, and you can even download that as an ebook from there in case you want to spend some more time on that. So just a little bit of discussion, and again, this is also something that is discussed, can be discussed thoroughly as a webinar of its own, is static versus dynamic masking. It's basically whether you prepare a data set that is anonymized, and then you let users access this anonymized data set, or whether you enable users to access data and place the anonymization or masking dynamically as they access the data. Again, it's a big topic of when to use which, but I would say that if your organization or if your needs are not changing dramatically, not changing, and if you have situations that are not dynamic in nature, you can use the static data masking. in most cases, when there's a lot of data users, a lot of requirements, a lot of changes in the data, applying static data masking is often becomes a bottleneck and becomes something that slows down the organization's data access. So let's talk about some of the challenges as well as some of the solutions to those challenges that we see here at Satori and in general. So the number one challenge, I would say, is to know where the sensitive data is, because if you don't know where the sensitive data is, then it's very hard to also apply anonymization or masking on it. And this is complicated because many organizations, the data is very dynamic, as I said. There are multiple technologies. You have your data warehouse / data warehouses. Then you have your data lake. You have your databases like transactional databases, RDBMSs. You have your document stores, document databases like MongoDB. And you have all of these places where your data is, and knowing where your sensitive data across all of them is a big challenge. Let's talk about the solution in a couple of slides. Who is setting requirements can turn into a finger pointing game, which is no fun for anyone, but in some of the cases it needs to be established. How do we set clear security policies and who is setting the access in general, the data access policies in general, and as part of it, the access to sensitive data and how to do it. User identity is often a challenge. For example, in many cases, there is a BI tool that connects to a data warehouse, and it connects using one account, like a single username account, and then all of your logs and all of your auditing and all of your access is based on that one user, or sometimes it's a script that many users are running, but you don't know who the user is. And starting to set masking on the BI tool becomes a control nightmare, because you need to set the same policies on the BI tool and then also on other ways people access data with, like their IDEs and their scripts. So that's also a challenge. And actual implementation of the data masking, in many cases configuring it across thousands of tables and tens of thousands of columns is challenging, more or less depending on the data technologies themselves, especially when doing over multiple technologies. Like you need to implement it for Postgres, but then also for MS SQL or MySQL or Snowflake or Redshift or whatever you have in your stack. And finally, another challenge, and I do have that more detailed in writing in our blog. We wrote a blog about such struggles, a post about that. Semi-structured data, where the data sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. It's hard to place, to know that sensitive data is in there, and it's harder to place masking policies as well. So a bit about overcoming those challenges. First of all, you need to establish the location of sensitive data across your data, and if your data changes, you need to do that in a continuous way. You can do it in several ways. Part of what Satori does is that we continuously identify sensitive data, but regardless of using Satori or not, you need to make sure that you don't know where sensitive data is just for an audit. You need to continuously know about it, otherwise you become less effective over time, and it can be, a day after the audit, you're already you have stale metadata. Data masking should be clear. It's the ownership, the data and the process, it's the security policies and the execution. Everything should be clear, so it's not ambiguous and no finger pointing and blaming. And most of those challenges, like semi-structured data, applying masking on different data sets, can be solved by Satori by using our platform. Of course, you can also find other solutions, but you can solve them using Satori. We're a cloud service. We're sitting between data consumers and the data. So we're aware both of the identity of the users and their attributes, as well as the data itself. So we continuously identify sensitive data, so you can place policies based on the data types themselves. You can say whenever there's an email, even if it's a new email, mask it. And we perform dynamic policies, including dynamic masking policies, but also row level security and other security policies at scale. We also enable a data marketplace for the company where people can request access to data and get access to data, and apply that at scale and across different data platforms. So, for example, user 1 request data and user 2 request data. According to the policies, one of them will get masked data, one of them will get it in clear text, and then they can also request using our data portal, okay, I need more access because of ABC, and get an approval for that without any need for writing SQL code or any other code. So that's pretty neat, and if you want, feel free to contact us. Schedule a meeting, a demo, we can show you how it really works. Other than that, if you want to read more, learn more, in our blog, we have a lot of different assets around that. We have one that's called 9 Common Struggles of Data Masking Projects or something like that. So you can look that up. It goes into different challenges around data masking. We also have blog posts about the solution, about our solution, or solutions in general to data masking. And you can, at the second page, satoricyber.com/dynamic data masking, you can see how our dynamic data masking works. And this is also the link if you want to book a demo, set a meeting, or you can contact me as well. I can redirect you to the right person. And so I enjoyed, but I was standing here on my own. So I hope you enjoyed as well. And I would love for you to give any feedback, good or bad. And I think it's time to get some questions. And thank you for listening, of course. But let's hear some questions if there are any.